Imagine a world where the most ambitious and successful technology mogul, who once seemed untouchable, loses everything, and it happens faster than you could have imagined. His companies, which were considered symbols of progress and innovation, begin to crumble one by one. His startups, once revolutionary, are now in decline, and with each passing day, his empire is losing strength. Who would have thought that it would be Elon Musk, the man who paved the way to space and changed the world with electric cars, who would be at the center of a worldwide cataclysm that ravages his business?
Well, this feels more like a Tesla-only story when you look at just this fall in EV sales for them, that they're suffering across Europe, down 45% in January. The wider EV market in Europe up 37%, so rivals are catching up and performing.
But what has happened? Where did it all begin? It all started with a single blow that seemed to be a simple economic decision, but soon turned into a global outcry. Canada, one of the United States' closest partners, suddenly decides to impose on Reputational a 100% tariff on car imports. This decision was not just an economic move, but a symbolic blow to Musk's empire, which in fact became the embodiment of American economic power. This measure was only the beginning of a long and rapid decline. After that, one by one, major contracts with governments began to fall, deals went bust, and news headlines were full of reports that his companies were no longer protected. Musk, who had once seemed invulnerable, became the target of international outrage.
Teslas are being torched across the country. Dealerships shot up and set on fire. Spray paint to vandalize and make a statement. People in Southern California are getting notes on their Teslas, calling them complicit Nazis for owning electric cars.
But that was only the first signal. When Canadian authorities began confronting Musk, other countries followed suit. France, Germany, Japan, each of these strikes seemed prepared and calibrated. Musk, a man who had launched rockets and created electric cars, was suddenly on the front lines of global politics, and it was not a bust. Protests against Musk began to gain momentum. Even his own investors, who once believed in his projects, began selling off shares of Tesla and Starlink. Some might say that Musk was a victim of his own politics, but in reality his decisions began to go against the interests of the countries and people who had once supported his ideas.
That's from the European Automobile Manufacturers Association. People just choosing with their wallets to not buy Teslas because of that Musk-Trump association. And actually here in London, an activist group called Everyone Hates Elon actually have been hacking bus stop signs with posters. I actually passed one yesterday. First, I wasn't quite sure what was happening, but it said the words 0 to 1939 in 3 seconds. Illusion here, 0 to 60 in like 3 seconds or something. But this poster was alluding to the start of World War II, and the image was of Musk giving that hand salute that we saw at Trump's inauguration that many have attacked as a Nazi gesture. Musk, though, has neither admitted or denied what he was doing. But we're seeing the knock-on effect of that anti-Musk anger across Europe and in terms of sales.
As Tesla prices began to plummet and Starlink's business collapsed under the pressure of government decisions, the world began to realize maybe Musk and his empire are no longer as invincible as they seemed a couple of years ago. And it's not just a loss of money, but a real moral collapse. Musk has lost the trust of both investors and his fans. How do we get out of this? And if and whether it is possible at all? Today we're going to tell you how one mistake, one political situation led to the catastrophic fall of an empire that once seemed invincible. Stay tuned, because what happens to Elon Musk and his companies today could be an important lesson for all of us.
KTLA Samantha Cortese joins us live with more on the wave of vandalism in protest of Elon Musk and his role in Washington. Sam?
Hi, Sharon, Micah. The ATF and FBI are collaborating with federal, state, and local law enforcement to investigate acts of domestic terrorism surrounding Teslas.
When we talk about a man who has managed to rewrite the rules of the game in the world of technology, the name Elon Musk immediately comes to mind. This tycoon has become a symbol of innovation, breakthrough technologies and space ambitions. However, no one could have predicted that his empire, which seemed untouchable, would begin to crumble so quickly and with such force. It all started with a single blow, which to many seemed like a mere business decision, but over time turned into a real international storm. And, As is often the case in political games, it started with a stab in the back, a stab that came from Canada.
Over the last couple of months. But the other thing that this could potentially be is an attempt at readjustment or correction by the Trump administration, in that one of Trump's closest kind of allies and supporters, and someone who's clearly very influential in the administration, is coming out to kind of push back against the recently implemented policies. So I'm thinking, or maybe hopeful is the right word, that this might be a signal that the administration is considering walking back some of those policies.
Canada, which was once one of the United States' closest trading partners, unexpectedly announced a 100% tariff on all Tesla cars that crossed its border. It wasn't just an economic decision, it was a sign that countries were beginning to look at Musk not as an impartial entrepreneur, but as a political figure with close ties to the US government, especially the Donald Trump administration. This wasn't just a tariff clampdown, it was a symbolic act that struck at the very heart of Musk's empire. He, as the man who in recent years had been the epitome of American economic power, suddenly became the target of opposition. And that was just the first wave.
Does that help Tesla? I mean, you had Tim Walz, who was a huge jerk,
Musk, of course, expected such a decision to cause discontent, but no one could have imagined how resonant it would be. The Canadian authorities didn't just increase duties, they chose Musk and his company to show the world that he was part of a broader political game. In Canada, it was a response to the US decision to take action against Canadian aluminum and auto parts, claiming they threatened national security. But instead of responding to Washington's actions, Canada chose to attack the man who had come to symbolize those decisions. Elon Musk found himself at the center of a political storm that was heating up by the day.
After Trump imposed those sweeping 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel imports, the European Union retaliating with tariffs on up to $28 billion of U.S. goods. Trump making it clear this isn't over, vowing to respond in kind with sweeping retaliatory tariffs early next month.
They're doing what they should be doing, perhaps, for the European Union, but it does create ill will. And as you know, we're going to be doing reciprocal tariffs. So whatever they charge us, we're charging them.
Canada also striking back with new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods, mostly steel and aluminum, but also computers and sporting goods.
Soon after this blowback, others began to follow. France, Germany, Japan, each of these countries in one way or another joined the hard-hitting campaign against Tesla and Musk. These decisions weren't always made in the open, but they were tangible. In Germany, for example, it became known that the government changed the rules for subsidizing electric cars, making only cars made in the European Union eligible for government support programs. This measure hit Tesla with such force that the company's sales in Europe, especially in Western Europe, fell by 50% in just 1 month. France followed Germany's lead and also suspended all subsidies for the purchase of Tesla cars, citing the need for safety checks. But these measures were just part of a broad political strategy that was being directed against Musk. Protests against his companies began to take place in these countries, and it wasn't just about economics. It was about politics, about the treatment of Musk as a public figure. These events shook up the financial markets. No matter how much Musk tried to control the situation, he increasingly became the object of international confrontation. Investors who had previously considered his company untouchable began to panic. On Wall Street, as usual, no one makes sudden moves without good reason. But when news that the Canadian tariff on Tesla had gone into effect began to spread, the company's stock began to fall. And that process continued with each passing day. Musk, who once boasted of investors' faith in his ideas, suddenly found himself at the epicenter of this catastrophic crisis. His close allies, such as the BlackRock Fund, began a precipitous sell-off of Tesla shares. Vanguard, one of the largest investment funds, also began withdrawing its money, and that was just the beginning.
Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the U.S., slapping new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods that are sold in Canada. And the 27 countries of the European Union imposing retaliatory tariffs on up to $28 billion worth of U.S. goods sold in Europe, including Harley-Davidson motorcycles and Kentucky bourbon. President Trump with the Irish Prime Minister visiting the White House today. The president suggesting his tariffs won't stop here, saying, "Of course, I'm going to respond." And tonight, right here, the new poll showing 56% of Americans disapprove of President Trump's handling of the economy. The number's even worse now on the president's tariffs.
The most painful blow came from his own relatives. Kimball Musk, Elon's brother, who had previously been an active investor in the company, suddenly sold a significant amount of his Tesla stock. It was a moment when even people close to him began to doubt the future of Musk and his business. They left without shouting or protesting publicly, but their actions, one way or another, signaled to other major players in the market, this man is no longer the man he used to be. For Musk, who was once a symbol of revolutionary technology and business success, this outcome was painful.
Outperforming as well in some cases, doing better than Tesla. And you just have to think, how much more is this a sustained issue for Tesla going forward, given the fact that you have Elon Musk, who's been very forthright in his opinions, particularly weighing in on politics, particularly in Europe. We've just had the European elections, which Musk has been very focused on. But across the piece, when you look at the performance for Tesla in Europe, it's not just in small countries. There are a lot of countries where Tesla has been performing badly, including in Germany, in the UK, where it has been lagging, and Spain as well.
However, with the loss of investors and the stock plummeting, Musk's problem was just beginning. Tesla's difficulties did not end there. This was just the tip of the iceberg. In the most unexpected turn of events, Musk not only faced economic and financial difficulties, but also found himself at the center of a global political crisis. His personal ties to the Trump administration and his openly supportive statements about right-wing political movements in Europe became a serious factor that began to affect the perception of Tesla and Musk as a whole. As Musk and his companies began to lose support from major countries in Europe and Canada, he began to feel his political figure drifting further and further away from neutrality and into a source of constant conflict and criticism. At some point, Musk became a symbol of political tension, and it was no longer just about his businesses, it was about his reputation as an entrepreneur. At that point, many analysts began to raise the question, when will his empire start to crumble? That moment came quickly, and Elon Musk didn't have time to prepare for such a steep decline.
Hey Diane, this investigation really just beginning, and one of the key elements will of course be the surveillance video, and investigators potentially have a lot of it to work with as they try to figure out what caused this fire. We know that surveillance footage has been turned over, including video from each of the cars, which could prove vital to understanding what happened here, because each vehicle has its own camera system that works even when the car is off, and 16 cars burned in this fire, and right now investigators don't know what caused it.
Just when it seems that all is lost, and no amount of effort can bring back the former glory, events occur that confirm it's not over. But for Musk, it was these events that truly signaled that his empire had entered a period of irreversible decline. After the Canadian attack on Tesla and subsequent moves by other countries began to weaken the company, the world faced an unexpected and significant turnaround, the abandonment of major investors and major players in the financial markets. First of all, it was Wall Street that began to show signs of real panic. First of all, it manifested itself in a massive sell-off of Tesla shares. As you know, the largest investment companies do not hurry with such steps without good reasons. BlackRock, Vanguard, and other institutional investors began to sharply reduce their investments in Tesla, which meant only one thing: the company's shares were in danger of falling, and the future of Tesla itself was in doubt. By this point, given Musk and his company's declining reputation on the international stage, it was clear that there was a cooling-off period in relations with Tesla around the world. Even his close family members were beginning to wind down their financial ties to the company, which was already sending a strong signal to the entire industry. This was the moment when Musk began to realize that his corporate image and political connections, which used to be his advantage, were now becoming a huge problem. Rumors began to circulate in Wall Street that a complete financial collapse of Tesla and Starlink could be imminent, causing alarm among major investors.
I mean, the things that he's doing is not trying to make America better. He's ruining our infrastructure, every department in our government. He's ruining, and he's right now destroying our economy. He's taken away all of our allies. We're a pariah in the world.
But the most painful blow Musk received came from within his company. Sudden layoffs and growing chaos within Tesla were a severe blow to the foundations of his empire. To regain investor confidence, Tesla began drastic measures, cutting car prices across the board to stimulate demand. However, this not only failed to help, but also exacerbated the problem. A huge number of customers who were buying cars at a higher price were unhappy with such a drastic price cut. This didn't just anger old customers, it exacerbated relationships with existing dealers and suppliers who had to quickly adapt to the new economic conditions. As anticipated, the price cuts meant that demand did not increase in the volume needed to restore stability. On the contrary, Tesla found itself in a situation where it could not sell cars even at reduced prices.
But they are not ruling out the possibility that this was arson. At the same time, as you just mentioned, there are groups that have been organizing ongoing and peaceful protests at Tesla dealerships around the world. These demonstrations targeting Elon Musk and his affiliation with the Trump administration. Also, Italy's prime minister is said to be close friends with Musk, and there were reports that Teslas have been vandalized in her hometown in Italy. Diane.
Amidst the demand crisis and falling sales, Tesla was faced with the fact that the cost of its cars was falling while its production costs remained flat. This created a threat of bankruptcy as the company could not cope with such costs. The production lines were running at maximum capacity, but despite this, the stock of cars in the warehouses was growing and the financial situation was worsening. This was further exacerbated by global supply issues, production delays, and increased administrative costs, which also resulted in lower profits.
We begin with the president's trade war escalating tonight. This evening, the retaliation against the United States, Canada, and the European Union responding quickly, just hours after President Trump's 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum coming into the United States.
However, the most significant and unexpected development for Musk was the situation with his satellite internet service, Starlink. This was a product that was initially envisioned as a technological breakthrough that would change the way global connectivity was envisioned. But starting in 2024, with Musk under international pressure, Starlink began to lose not only contracts with government agencies, but also the trust of many large users. The reasons ranged from concerns about data security to shifting priorities in countries that had previously supported the project. It wasn't just a loss of contracts, it was a systemic crisis that brought about the downfall of the very idea of Starlink as a global network. Soon after several major nations such as Australia and France suspended cooperation, rumors of major project closures began to spread around the world. Instead of increasing its market share, Starlink gradually lost it, and Musk found himself trapped. His ambitious project was squeezed out by competitors who offered better terms and support.
Well, you will hear people over in Europe say the new Model Y, the Juniper, could be a difference maker. But that's been in that market now for more than a month. And you would think that you would see a greater snapback if it's going to be a difference maker. Look, we could be wrong. It could be a difference maker once you get the sales for April, May, and June. But when you have a country like Norway, I think the sales were down something like 11% there. I mean, that's a very savvy EV consumer in Norway. And that's long been a strength for Tesla. Very small market, not huge volume, but I think almost all of the vehicles they sell there are electric. And they embraced Tesla long before others. And, you know, the reports there are not encouraging.
At first, these changes were barely noticeable, small shifts toward competitors that began to fill the voids left by Tesla and Starlink. Over time, however, the magnitude of the process became apparent. Companies that were once perceived as his direct competitors, such as Rivian, BYD, and Lucid Motors, began to aggressively take over the market share that Musk once held without any barriers. The major blow, however, was the fact that not only his corporate enemies but also his former allies began to turn their backs on him. As early as 2025, it became clear that Tesla was no longer perceived as an industry leader, but instead as an underdog that couldn't manage the crisis.
A 371, most were saying 350 to 360. Now they're coming in at 336,068, production of 362,615. So for some point of reference here, you're going back to Q2, maybe Q1 of 2022 in terms of the last time that they had production this or deliveries this low for one quarter. So again, Tesla deliveries worse than expected at just over 336,000 deliveries in the first quarter. Guys, I'll send it back to you.
That's horrible. Can I just ask Phil, how about the Cybertruck? How's that doing? You got a little inventory there in the Cybertruck?
Rivian, with a more conservative approach and the backing of institutional investors, began offering their cars in markets where Tesla had previously been the unquestioned authority. Not only were their cars cheaper, but they were also much more accessible to the masses, unlike Tesla, which continued to suffer from a high price segment and a decline in service quality. This attracted new customers who not only preferred more affordable cars, but also reliability that they could not find in Tesla's products. Meanwhile, Chinese automaker BYD, which managed to persuade the Chinese government to provide favorable conditions for the production of electric cars, began to take over the market at an alarming rate. In European and Asian countries, where Tesla was previously on a pedestal, BYD was now selling its cars with better performance and affordability. In addition, unlike Tesla, BYD cars were not burdened by political image, which played an important role in the eyes of consumers. In addition, the Chinese manufacturer immediately got involved in local infrastructure projects, which allowed it not only to sell more cars but also to create an ecosystem to service them.
Running around on stage with the Tesla stock price, where the stock price had gone in half. And he was overjoyed. What an evil thing to do. What a creep, what a jerk. Like who derives joy?
At this time, the company itself began mass layoffs. Everyone who had once believed in Musk was starting to leave. Engineers, managers, top executives, all of them were looking for new opportunities in more stable and less conflicted companies. Right before his eyes, Musk was losing his team and Tesla's production lines were slowing down. What was once a recipe for success was now a recipe for destruction. Employees who were once proud to work at Tesla were now saying that working for Musk had become impossible. It was not only an economic crisis, but a moral crisis for the entire company. Then, when it seemed like nothing could make things worse, Musk began to lose another important component of his empire: consumers. In cities where Tesla had previously been a symbol of progress and the future, mass abandonment of the cars now began. In places like San Francisco, Seattle, and Boston, customers have begun to get rid of their models. People who were once proud to drive a Tesla were now avoiding public places with its logos. Trust in the company collapsed, and Tesla itself became associated with political scandals and failures. In response to this crisis, Musk began to take increasingly extravagant steps, but this did not bring results. And so, from one blow to the next, his empire began to crumble. Financial reports showed that the company could no longer cover its expenses, and the market no longer perceived it as a leader. Musk had lost everything: respect, investor confidence, his bond with his employees, and worst of all, the future of his empire. With the fall of Tesla and Starlink, not only Musk's ascent was over, but also his defeat in the global battle for technological leadership